My name is Evelyn Ross. I'm 66 years old. Mornings in Charleston are usually quiet, soft salt air from the harbor, the creak of the old magnolia outside my window, the kettle beginning to hum. I was buttering toast when the first knock came. Sharp. Impatient. It didn't sound like a visitor. I hadn't turned the deadbolt after bringing in the milk, and the chain was off. Before I could reach the door, it swung open. Richard stepped inside without waiting. My son, 38. Shoulders drawn tight beneath a pressed jacket. Phone in one hand, a brown leather folder in the other. Morning, I said. Surprised. You should have called. I don't have time for small talk, he replied, setting the folder on the kitchen table. I need your help. The word help had never sounded like a request from him. He flipped open the folder and slid a sheaf of papers toward me. At the top, figures, signatures, red-stamped dates, debt statement, $200,000. It's from Lauren's property project, he said. The contractor bailed, market dipped. Now she's stuck. We need the cash fast. I stared at the numbers. Richard, that's not a small favor. That's everything I've saved since your father. It's family money. Mom. He said it flat, like a fact. You're sitting on it while we're drowning. I'll pay you back. The word struck somewhere deep and familiar. Family money. The same phrase his father used before cashing out my account for investments. I'd believed it then too. Don't disappoint me, Richard added. Voice clipped, eyes hard. For a moment, he wasn't my son, just the echo of the man I'd buried 8 years ago. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their shaking. You should go. Let me think. He exhaled sharply, gathering the folder. Think fast. I'll come by tonight. The door shut behind him. Silence filled the kitchen, except for the kettle's low hiss. I turned it off, letting the steam fade into still air. The toast had gone cold, outside. The gulls circled above the harbor, their cries thin and distant. I sat there until the light shifted across the tiles, wondering when my home had started feeling like someone else's office. When I finally rose, I wasn't sure what frightened me more, his debt, or how easily his voice had sounded like command. I sat by the window as the morning drifted into afternoon, the tea on the table gone cold. The papers Richard had left still lay open, their numbers pressing into my mind like a bruise that wouldn't fade. The house was too quiet, only the faint ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It used to feel comforting, that rhythm of ordinary life. Now it sounded like the echo of all the years I'd spent obeying other people's rules. When Rob was alive, I'd believed structure meant safety. His rules, his budgets, his plans. He handled every bill, every purchase, every decision. I'd told myself it was love, that letting him lead was what good wives did. And when he died, I thought the silence meant freedom. But Richard stepped in almost seamlessly, saying, I'll help you with the accounts. Mom, I'd handed over the passwords and the papers without a second thought. Help slowly turned into management. Management into control. Soon my cards had him added as an authorized user, and the bank notifications went to his phone. And when he asked for small loans for emergencies, I never asked questions. The money never came back, but the guilt always did. On the kitchen counter, tucked inside an old recipe book, I found a note I hadn't seen in years. Rob's handwriting firm. Confident family helps family. I read it twice. Once. It had sounded like devotion. Now it felt like a warning carved into stone, meant to keep me obedient. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into a drawer. Outside, the sky was turning the pale gold of late afternoon. For the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't want to live by anyone else's rules again. By evening, the light outside had thinned into that amber color Charleston wears before night. I had just finished washing the last dish when the sound of tires rolled up the driveway. Richard didn't bother to knock this time. He walked in with Lauren close behind, her perfume trailing after her like hesitation. He carried the same brown folder and set it down on the table as if dropping a verdict. "We've worked out a schedule," he said. "If you transfer the money this week, we can settle most of the debt before the next billing cycle." His tone was brisk, businesslike. I almost expected him to slide me a pen for my signature. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said, keeping my voice even. "You live in a house you didn't even buy," he snapped, eyes narrowing. "The least you could do is help your own family." Lauren shifted beside him, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. She looked everywhere but at me. I wondered if she felt trapped too, just in a different cage. I took a breath. For years, I had swallowed my words before they reached the air, afraid they might sound ungrateful or defiant. But something in me, something quiet and steady, rose up. "You've mistaken my love for permission," I said. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't loud, but it landed hard in the space between us. Richard blinked, then gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" I didn't answer. He grabbed the folder, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The front door slammed, rattling the window panes. Lauren followed him silently, her face pale and tight. When the house stilled again, I realized my hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from something heavier and older. Beneath the tremor, I felt it taking shape, anger, sharp and clear as the first crack in a long, solid wall. I hadn't spoken to Teresa Valen in months, but that night, her name came to me as easily as breathing. She'd known me since college, back when I laughed loudly and believed kindness alone could fix the world. Teresa had practiced law for 30 years before retiring by the harbor. She understood people like Richard before they finished their first excuse. When she answered, her voice was firm, familiar. "Evelyn, what happened?" We met the next morning at a cafe facing the water. The harbor smelled of salt and fuel. Gulls shrieked above as boats drifted in slow motion. I told her everything: the debt, Richard's demand, the way his words sounded like Rob's all over again. She listened without interruption, stirring her coffee as if measuring my resolve. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You raised a man who learned from your silence. Time to unteach him." The words cut through the fog in my head. I didn't argue. She took out her notebook and began listing steps, like she was back in court. Close joint accounts, move assets, open a private bank account under my name only, draft power of attorney papers, and prepare for resistance. Her precision steadied me. When I hesitated, she reached across the table and touched my wrist. "You can stay in my spare room if things get loud, but don't wait for him to change. He won't." I nodded, eyes burning from the wind and something deeper. For years I'd mistaken survival for peace. As we stood, the sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting the ripples on the harbor. Teresa squeezed my hand once before walking ahead. I lingered a moment, breathing in the briny air, knowing the tide had already begun to turn. The morning light crept through the blinds, soft and golden, touching the edges of the kitchen that had once been the center of everything. I stood by the counter, suitcase open beside me, and folded clothes with a precision that kept my hands from shaking. I packed only what mattered: 2 changes of clothes, my medication, a folder of documents Teresa had helped me prepare, and my mother's locket. When I picked it up, the chain tangled around my fingers, cool and familiar. I almost reached for Richard's baby photo on the fridge, him grinning, chocolate smeared on his cheeks. But I stopped. Some things were better left where they belonged. I slid the photo into the drawer and shut it softly. At the bank, the clerk smiled politely as I signed the withdrawal forms. My pen left a faint tremor on the paper, but my signature was still my own. Years of work, small inheritances, savings. Rob once managed it was all finally in my name again. When the teller handed me the cashier's check, I walked 2 doors down to the new bank Teresa had picked, opened an account in my name only, and deposited the check. I felt the weight of something shift inside me. Ownership. Back home, the house felt too still, as if waiting for a sound that would never come. I made a cup of coffee I didn't plan to drink, then sat down at the kitchen table. On a blank sheet of paper, I wrote slowly, carefully, "The one disappointed is me. Don't look for me." I folded the note once, placed it beside the half-empty cup, and stood. The sound of the lock turning behind me was sharper than I expected, like a line finally drawn. Outside, the sun was higher, warm against my face as I walked down the driveway. Each step made my pulse steadier, my breath deeper. By the time I reached the coast highway, the salt wind tangled in my hair, and I didn't look back. When Richard's car would turn into that driveway hours later, the house would still smell faintly of coffee and goodbye. I would already be miles away, the tide at my side, carrying me toward the part of my life I hadn't yet lived. The sun was already low when Richard's car screeched into the driveway. Gravel scattered beneath the tires as he slammed the door and strode toward the porch. Lauren followed a few steps behind, clutching her purse like a shield. "Mom," he called, his voice sharp, impatient. The house gave no reply, only the faint echo of his footsteps bouncing off the walls. The kitchen lights were still on, a coffee cup half full on the table, steam long gone. He spotted the folded paper immediately. For a moment, he hesitated before touching it, as if it might burn. Then he opened it. "The one disappointed is me. Don't look for me." He read the words twice. The first time, they made no sense. The second time, they landed like a punch. "She'll be back," he muttered. His tone was clipped, defensive, but the edge of certainty had dulled. Lauren stood near the doorway, eyes moving between him and the note. "Maybe," she said softly. She finally meant it this time. Richard's jaw tightened. He crumpled the paper, then smoothed it again, unable to let it go. The silence pressed in too wide, too heavy. He looked around the room, the empty chair by the window, the neat absence of her things, the missing rhythm of someone moving through the space. For the first time, the house felt foreign, too clean, too cold. Lauren reached out as if to touch his arm, then stopped. Richard sank into the chair where his mother had sat that morning. The note lay on the table between them, small but final. For years, he had held control like a birthright. Now, in the hush she'd left behind, it felt like nothing more than an echo, with no one left to hear it. The apartment was small enough that I could touch both walls of the kitchen if I stretched my arms, but the window overlooked the river, and that was enough. The building smelled of old brick, salt, and paint like something that had endured and refused to be erased. The landlord, a quiet man with kind eyes, handed me the keys without asking questions. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's steady." I nodded. Steady was all I wanted. I spent the first evening unpacking the few things I'd brought: folded clothes, a small kettle, my mother's locket on the nightstand. When I opened the window, the breeze carried the faint scent of marsh grass and distant rain. It didn't feel like escape anymore. It felt like exhale. Days began to find their rhythm. I signed up to volunteer at the local art center downtown, teaching watercolor basics to seniors. Most of them painted flowers and ocean views. I painted light, just light, and the space it touched. We laughed often, quietly but sincerely. Money was tight, but not suffocating. I learned to live on less, cooking simple meals, fixing what I could, needing little. There were moments of course, when loneliness brushed against me like a chill draft through the old windows. But it passed. Guilt, the heavier visitor, left more quickly than I'd imagined. One night, as I brewed tea, I heard laughter from the apartment next door, a burst of joy, clumsy and unfiltered. Someone's record player followed with an old jazz tune. I leaned against the window, watching the river shimmer in the streetlights. For years, I'd confused silence with peace. Now, surrounded by the soft hum of other lives, I realized peace didn't have to be quiet at all. It just had to be mine. The letter came on a Thursday, tucked between a grocery flyer and an electricity bill. The handwriting stopped me before I even opened it sharp. Hurried. Too familiar. Richard. I carried it to the small table by the window, the one where I drank my morning tea, and sat for a long moment before unfolding the paper. He wrote that Lauren had left. The words were blunt, almost defensive. She couldn't handle the pressure. He blamed the debt, the sleepless nights, everything but himself. Then, halfway down the page, his tone shifted. I miss you, Mom. I know I said things I shouldn't have. Maybe we could talk. There it was, the same soft plea that once made me forgive anything. I read the letter once. Then again, more slowly. The ink had smudged where his hand must have paused. It wasn't quite remorse. Not yet. More like confusion, the first cracks in a wall I'd helped him build. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. No anger. No tears. Just a quiet certainty that I didn't owe a reply. That evening, I lit a small candle on the windowsill. The flame swayed with the river wind, golden and steady. You'll learn, I whispered into the glow. Just not through me, outside. The lights of passing boats shimmered across the water. Somewhere beyond them, my son was sitting in a house that used to be mine, learning what it felt like to live without someone who always said yes. I watched the flame until it steadied, until my heart did too, and then blew it out gently, letting the smoke curl upward like a final word I no longer needed to speak. Spring settled over Charleston slowly, the air softening with the scent of salt and magnolia. At the art center, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting the tables in gold. I was showing one of the ladies how to rinse her brushes when the door opened behind me. I turned and froze. Richard stood there, framed by the light. His shoulders seemed narrower, his face drawn. The confidence he used to wear like armor was gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the gentle scrape of a chair on the wooden floor. I'm not here for money, he said quickly, as if the words had been rehearsed. I just wanted to thank you for stopping me. I searched his face, unsure whether what I heard was regret or exhaustion. He looked older somehow, not in years, but in spirit. The kind of aging that comes from finally meeting yourself. You don't owe me thanks, I said. You owe yourself a change. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'm trying. We stood in that quiet space, the past hovering between us but no longer heavy enough to crush the air. When he turned to leave, I didn't stop him. I didn't reach out or ask where he was living, what he was doing. I simply watched him step into the sunlight, his shadow stretching across the doorway before it disappeared. For the first time, I didn't feel fear or longing in his absence. No ache, no guilt, just a steady calm, like the tide finding its rhythm again. When I sat back down, the water in my paint cup shimmered with the light. I dipped my brush and drew a soft line of blue across the paper. The color of peace finally earned. A full year had passed since the morning I left that note on the kitchen table. Now, my little apartment hummed with laughter and the scent of baked peaches. The women from the art center filled every corner, widows, retirees, quiet souls who had found their voices again through brushes, color, and company. We'd turned the evening into a small celebration. Plates of roasted vegetables and cornbread crowded the table. And someone had brought a bottle of cheap wine that tasted better with each story told. Outside, the sky stretched wide over Charleston, soft with the rose light of early evening, the river catching the last of the sun. I watched them as they spoke Dorothy with her easy laugh, Maria teasingly scolding her for mixing paint with coffee again, and Lillian humming an old tune as she arranged wildflowers into a vase. There was no heaviness in the room, only warmth, the kind that comes when you stop trying to be needed and start learning to simply belong. When the night grew dark enough, I led them all down to the pier. The river shimmered like glass beneath the lanterns we carried. They were small, fire-safe lotus lanterns made of rice paper and beeswax cups, approved for the community pier. We'd cleared it with the center ahead of time. One by one, we switched on the warm LEDs and set them afloat, each light drifting away slowly, carrying a wish, a memory, or a piece of something once too heavy to keep, for the ones who rebuilt themselves, I said softly, and for the ones still learning to say no. The women fell silent, their faces glowing in the flicker of the lanterns. The lights bobbed and wandered down the current, small but steadfast against the night. As the river carried them toward the sea, I felt the air shift gentle, full, alive. I wasn't waiting for apologies anymore, or explanations, or the return of things I'd lost. I was too busy living the life I once postponed. The lanterns drifted farther until they became specks of gold on the horizon, and I smiled, feeling lighter than I ever had. The world, I realized, hadn't collapsed. When I said no, it had finally opened its arms.